있었습니다.
기억에 남는 거겠네요.
맞습니다.
그렇네요. All right, so when he first released his book, because he's not a history major, the whole process of writing it was of course a huge challenge. But after writing this, because the people, descendants of the activists were so happy to see their ancestors being introduced through this book, they bought 30 and 50 of these books, and he was called to book concerts in one of the most famous bookstores were not, and he even received calls from movie directors to turn some of these stories into a movie. And I guess it was whole of that ripple effect that was created through this book that is the most memorable response overall. All right, well, many young people today are busy getting by with their everyday lives, including myself, and so we think that space to reflect on history is sort of, we don't have time for that, is what we often think. But even so, why do you think is it important for us to learn about these independence activists? 요즘 청년들이 물론 이제 예전이랑 아예 다르다라고 할 수 있죠. 좀 사뭇 다르긴 하잖아요.
네.
일상생활을 하는데 바쁘고 사실 먹고 사는 문제가 제일 힘들기도 한데 그래도 이제 그럼에도 불구하고 역사를 등한시할 게 아니라 우리가 독립운동가들의 삶 정도는 알아야 하는 이유가 있다면 어떻게 될까요?
일단 역사를 지금까지 저는 가르치는 방식이 좀 문제가 있었다고 생각을 해요. 그러니까 예를 들어 우리가 아무리 바빠도 뭐 부모를 공경한다든지 아니면은 최소한의 사회에서 지켜져야 되는 우리 전통과 문화라는 것이 있잖아요. 근데 그것을 이제 바쁜 거와 이건 좀 약간 별개의 문제인 것이죠. 그냥 한국인이 한국인다운 것, 그리고 사람이 사람다운 것, 이런 것들은 어떤 뭐 교육의 좀 방식에 따라서 좀 달라질 수도 있다고 봐요. 그러니까 역사를 공부해야 되는 어떤 공부 과목, 시험 과목이 아니라 이것이 저는 하나의 문화적으로 스며들어서 한국인은 이런 높은 어떤 역사관을 갖고 있어, 국가관을 갖고 있어, 이런 것을 저는 이제 진짜 역사 교육이라 생각을 하는데 그 중에서도 이 독립운동사가 왜 의미가 더 크냐면 가깝기 때문이에요. 예를 들어서 우리가 삼국시대 같은 것을 이야기하면 이건 너무 먼 얘기이기 때문에 오늘날의 청년들에게 이게 연결되는 게 너무 약해요. 하지만 독립운동사는 우리 할아버지 정도의 세대의 어떤 문제이기 때문에 그들이 지켰던 어떤 그 가치, 그들이 전해주고자 하는 가치, 이런 것들이 그 의미가 오늘날의 현대 사회에도 적용되는 게 있기 때문이거든요. 네.
Okay, wow. So it all goes back to how we teach history. That's why people think history is something that's not fun or we don't have time to learn about. And, you know, we have filial piety, respecting our parents, the elderly, and that is a part of our custom, tradition, and culture, right? And Sangyu believes that learning history should also be a part of that culture. And why do we have to learn the lives of independent activists? That's because they're the closest in our history. They're the stories of our grandparents, that period, which is really close to all of us. And learning about them is definitely important for living our everyday lives as well, is what Sangyu said. All right, well, let's take a look at the third keyword now. It's the last keyword. 이제 마지막 키워드 한번 살펴볼까요?
네.
열어주시겠어요? 네. All right, so the last keyword is ripple of hope. All right, why did you choose this for us? 왜 골라주셨죠, 이 키워드?
이거는 이제 제 삶에서 제가 추구하는 어떤 꿈이자 방향하고도 좀 연결이 돼요. 그러니까 저는 지금까지 제 삶을 돌아봤을 때 내가 언제 가장 나다운가, 나다운 삶인가, 이런 것들을 봤을 때 누군가에게 어떤 이런 희망의 파문을 선물할 때, 줄 때가 가장 행복하다 느끼는 것 같아요. 그리고 이 단어를 처음 이제 알게 된 것은 제가 이제 미국에서 유학을 할 때였는데 그때 있었던 한 가지 사건 때문에 이 단어를 좀 저의 어떻게 보면 약간 좌우명 같은 슬로건처럼 가지고 살았던 때가 있어서 그래서 이 단어를 선택했습니다.
Okay, I wonder what that is. But first of all, Sangyu chose this ripple of hope as the last key word because it's closely related to his dream and how he wants to live his life going forward. And it's related to this one incident that happened when he was studying in the States. Well, what was that incident? 어떤 사건이었던 거죠?
제가 미국에 있을 때 제 하버드 대학교에서 굉장히 좀 심각한 역사 왜곡 이제 사건이 한번 일어났어요. 그래서 그 사건을 간단히 말씀을 드리면 하버드 MBA 과정에 모든 사람이 반드시 들어야 되는 필수 과목인데 그곳에서 일본의 재단에 로비를 받은 그 하버드 대학교 교수들이 한국의 산업 발전사라는 교재를 만들었는데
네.
그 교재가 7년 동안 강의가 되었고요. 근데 그 강의 내용이 이제 식민 지배로 인해서 지금의 한국이 만들어졌고 식민 지배로 인해서 BTS부터 이런 한국의 아이돌들이
네.
K-팝이 전 세계로 퍼진 것이다. 결국 이 K-팝은 이 식민 지배로 인한 것이다. 그러니까 한국은 감사해야 된다. 이
네.
내용을 7년 동안 가르쳐 왔던 거예요. 그거를
지금-
아무도 몰랐던 것이죠.
지금 화가 여기까지 치밀어 오르는데요.
아마 다 화가
들으면서.
나실 겁니다. 예.
All right, so this incident is related to a historical distortion that was really shocking to Sang-gyu as he was studying back in Harvard Business School. And there was this essential subject that people had to learn. It was titled the industrial development of Korea. And for the past 7 years, because a Japanese foundation had lobbied the professors there, people had to learn that because of the Japanese colonial rule period, we were able to achieve this huge industrial development as well as the Hallyu wave and the cultural development, which does not make sense at all. Okay, so that is a serious historical distortion that you experience. 엄청난 지금 역사 왜곡인데 굉장히 억울해요. 저는 들으면서도. So how did you solve it in the end?
그때 이제 하버드에서 그걸 발견하자마자 그러니까 제가 했던 곳이 케네디 스쿨이었는데 그곳에 있는 청년들과 졸업생들에게 먼저 알렸고 그들과 함께 바로 성명문을 저희가 발표를 했었고요. 영문과 한글로 된 이제 성명문을 발표하고 그 이후에 학교에 공식적으로 이것을 수정해 달라는 어떤 진짜 역사, 이것의 전후 과정이 제대로 된 중심 잡힌 역사 논문 같은 것들을 제공을 했는데 그래도 이제 하버드에서 반응이 없자 이제 한국에 있는 언론사와 방송사에 이 사실을 이제 공유를 했고요. 그리고 이제 전문적인 어떤 인터뷰와 뉴스 속보가 나가기 시작했습니다. 그리고 당시 보스턴에 있는 총영사관에도 이 사실을 알리면서 이제 전방위적으로 좀 압박을 했고요. 그러자 이제 학교 측에서 조금씩 이제 긴장을 하면서 이제 좀 반응이 왔고 결정적으로 하버드 자체에는 굉장히 오래된 신문사가 있어요. 크림슨이라는 신문사가 있는데 그 크림슨의 이 내용을 이제 원고를 투고하면서 결국 이 문제가 정점에 치달았고요. 근데 원고가 거부당했었어요. 왜냐하면 이 원고가 들어가는 순간 하버드 경영대학원의 명예가 떨어진다고. 근데 그것을 저희가 계속해서 압박을 했고 결국 수십 차례의 이메일을 주고받으면서 결국 원고가 실리게 됐고요. 그 원고가 실리자마자 하버드 경영대학원에서 사과 성명문을 발표하고 그리고 이제 그 문제의 교과서를 전면적으로 수정하고 저는 한 달 뒤에 이제 하버드를 졸업할 수 있었습니다.
Oh, wow. What a story, Sang-gyu. And thank you for leading that. All right. So he wanted to request, of course, a change in this particular subject. And he collected a statement with various students. And it was a hard process. It was a huge challenge. He let this be known to the Korean medias as well, media outlets. And there was this newspaper sort of club in Harvard titled Crimson, and they submitted this article that would fix the whole story or the content of that distorted subject, and it took a while. They had to give emails forth and back in order to get it for it to be accepted. And in the end, it was accepted. And of course, because Harvard at first didn't want to accept it, it would be a scratch on their honor. But later, they accepted it and submitted a apology statement as well. And thanks to Sang-gyu, we no longer have to see people learning from this distorted subject. And thank you once again, Sang-gyu, for taking the lead. All right, well, it was such a meaningful 1 hour with you. But before we let you go, I'd like to ask you if you have any sort of plans in the near future. 앞으로 혹시 또 어떤 새로운 시도를 계획하고 있으신지 말씀 여쭙고 또 마무리를 하면 좋을 것 같네요.
지금까지 했던 일들을 조금 더 지속적으로 하기 위해서 현재 재단을 만들고 있고요. 그리고
오케이.
또 하나는 제가 이제 집필했던 분들을 내용을 가지고 지금 또 영화를 지금 그런 독립운동가분들의 역사 베이스의 사실 베이스의 그런 영화를 지금 만드는 준비를 하고 있어요. 그래서 조만간 또 스크린이나 아니면 다른 곳에서 또 인사를 드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다.
Oh, okay. So, in order to continue what he's been doing until now, he is actually in the process of establishing a foundation, and also he's working on the project to create a movie based on the story of one of the activists. All right. Well, how was the 1 hour for you? 마지막으로 이 지난 1시간 어떠셨어요, 좀 작가님?
일단은 지금까지 제가 이런 이야기를 보통 한국인들만 대상으로 어떻게 보면 얘기를 많이 했는데
네.
지금 이제 아리랑 TV의 청취자분들이 이제 글로벌 하지
네.
않습니까? 그래서 이런 이야기를 함께 이렇게 전달할 수 있게 해주신 모든 분들께 너무 감사드리고요. 그리고 아리랑 TV를 보시는 분들은 기본적으로 한국을 되게 좋아하시는 분들이라 생각을 해요. 그래서 앞으로 이런 K 콘텐츠나 K 역사에 대해서 좀 더 관심을 가져주시면 너무 감사할 것 같습니다.
All right. So Sang-gyu has only talked about Korean history, everything that he's talked about today, only on Korean media outlets. But it's really meaningful that he's able to do so here on Culture Crunch, Arirang, where there are international listeners tuning in. And he hopes that you will continue to pay a lot of interest and love to our culture as well as our history. All right. So we'll have to wrap up right there. We'll sign off with our last song. Here is Hello Future by NCT Dream. Shall we say goodbye together?
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Keep crunching.
Keep crunching.
시작이라는 걸 넌 믿을 수 있겠니 이제야 사랑을 할 것 같아 Radio 나 가는 거야 나를 믿어 Soldiers knocking doors down yelling now 천천히 갔던 시간들은 모두 뒤로 보내 웃음이 소리치네 달려가 날 아파 If you're rockin' with me Come on here we go Satellite radio 내 미래 전해줘 온 세상과 정광야 위로 후회 없이 사랑했다고 말하게 기다려서 어서 와 어디든 we're coming together 아무 걱정하지 마 즐길 거야 Hello future 너를 만나 같이 더 빛나게 아름다운 시간만 쌓자 On our way up, hello future. On our way up, hello future. 미래에 너를 좋아하게 됐어. 경계 위로 손을 맞대면 우리 너무 닮아 있어. 모두 찾게 될지 결국 웃게 될지 지금부터 운명이라고 해. Bang bang bang. Fire fire. 자욱한 연기 속에 살아남은 그 작은 꽃처럼. Straight facts. 같은 시간 속에 너를 사랑하고 있어. Here we go. 날개를 펼치고 또 꺾이고 다쳐도 누구보다 강한 너잖아 미래의 미래도 널 사랑할 너란다 기다려서 어서 와 어디든 we're coming together 아무 걱정하지 마 즐길 거야 Hello future 너를 만나 같이 더 빛나게 아름다운 시간만 쌓자 Hey, I'm trying to center me 해외도 center B 흔들리지 않게 걸어 나아갈 수 있을지 수만 있으니 거꾸로 같은 엔트로피 그 어디쯤 너 기다리고 있을지 멀지 않아 눈을 떠봐 내가 원한 모든 건 너뿐이라고 Be on my way 다 버린 채 여린 온기에 남은 잿더미 속에 Ready to clap back 거리 멀지 않은 peace 아픈 시간 네가 맞잡기를 바라고 또 원했지 Who you gonna believe 기다려서 어서 와 어디든 we're coming together 아무 걱정하지 마 즐길 거야 Hello future 너를 만나 같이 더 빛나게 아리랑 아라리요 아리랑 고개로 넘어간다 힘껏 달려 멈추지 마 세상 끝까지 가자 아리랑 아리랑 가라리요
Introducing Korean broadcast content that you won't be able to stop watching. For weary modern souls, Dr. Romantic, the quirky genius doctor of Puldam Hospital, prescribes heartwarming tales of humanity. A couple together for 7 years sees their rose-tinted glasses shatter. Can they keep their relationship alive? Discover the raw stories of youth, work, and love. Beyond what social media can show, experience the vibrant Korea through its hidden gems. Mama, the ultimate K-pop festival for global fans. Find your star in a feast of trendy music and electrifying performances. Now, the whole world enjoys it together.
Oil prices saw another spike, with Brent crude surpassing $110 per barrel, following an Israeli attack on Iran's key South Pars natural gas field, and retaliation from Iran, a strike on major energy infrastructure in Qatar. U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested the idea of shifting responsibility for securing the Strait of Hormuz to countries that depend on the waterway, saying if the U.S. were to finish off what's left of Iran, it would put what he called non-responsive allies in gear. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept interest rates steady for a second straight meeting, noting uncertainty from the Middle East conflict. This comes as policymakers still expect to make one rate cut this year, as they face a difficult balancing act between renewed inflationary pressures and a weakening labor market. Hello and thanks for joining us on Arirang News. As the conflict in the Middle East continues, attacks on energy infrastructure led global oil prices to spike overnight. Experts say this may worsen if disruptions persist. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
Global oil prices surged sharply after military exchanges between Israel and Iran targeted key energy infrastructures across the Middle East. May deliver Brent crude futures, a global benchmark, jumped above $111 at 4:48 p.m. Eastern Time. With high volatility, Brent's return to the $110 range was the first time in 9 days. April delivery West Texas Intermediate futures climbed to $100 a barrel. This comes as Iranian state media reported that Israel struck gas processing infrastructure for the South Pars field, which accounts for more than 70% of Iran's natural gas production. The strike marks the first time Israel has directly targeted Iran's energy production infrastructure, having previously limited attacks to fuel storage sites. U.S. officials said Washington had been informed of the plan in advance, but was not involved in the operation. In retaliation, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps gave a list of imminent attacks on energy facilities in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, urging evacuations. It then launched a missile strike on a major gas-producing area in Qatar, which accounts for roughly 20% of global LNG supply. Saudi Arabia's defense ministry also said that it had intercepted and destroyed 4 ballistic missiles launched toward Riyadh. Experts warned that the conflict could further disrupt global energy flows, particularly as the Strait of Hormuz faces effective closure. Roughly 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply passes through the strait. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested that countries heavily dependent on energy shipments through the Strait of Hormuz take responsibility for securing the waterway once the current crisis is over. In a post on social media platform Truth Social, Trump questioned what would happen if the U.S. stepped back after finishing off the threat from what he calls the Iranian terror state, arguing that nations relying on the strait would be forced to act. Trump's remarks hint at increased pressure on allies who have resisted U.S. calls to deploy naval forces to protect shipping in the strait. Though the Strait of Hormuz is a critical route for global oil shipments, the United States has a relatively low dependence on Middle Eastern oil imports, whereas Asian and European economies, including South Korea and Japan, are much more reliant on oil from the region. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept interest rates unchanged for a second straight meeting, citing elevated uncertainty from the ongoing Middle East conflict. Policymakers still project one rate cut this year, despite rising oil prices and weaker job data clouding the economic outlook. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has held its benchmark interest rate steady for a second straight meeting, maintaining its projection of one rate cut this year as uncertainty grows over the economic fallout from the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. At its two-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting on Wednesday, the central bank decided to keep the federal funds rate unchanged in the 3.5 to 3.75% range.
Today, the FOMC decided to leave our policy rate unchanged. We see the current stance of monetary policy as appropriate to promote progress toward our maximum employment and 2% inflation goals.
The move leaves the interest rate gap between South Korea and the United States at up to 1.25 percentage points. The decision also comes as policymakers face a difficult balancing act. Rising global oil prices are fueling concerns about renewed inflationary pressure, while a weaker U.S. labor market adds to worries about slowing growth. The latest employment report showed the economy lost 92,000 jobs last month. Despite the uncertainty, the Fed's updated median forecast still points to the federal funds rate being lowered to around 3.4% by the end of the year, signaling the possibility of a single quarter percentage point cut in 2026, unchanged from its December outlook. In its statement, the central bank warned that uncertainty about the economic outlook remains elevated, particularly due to developments in the Middle East. Officials said the implications of the conflict for the U.S. economy are unclear, but stressed they are closely monitoring risks to both sides of the Fed's dual mandate of achieving maximum employment and stable inflation at around 2%. Fed Chair Jerome Powell also stressed that higher energy prices are likely to push overall inflation higher in the near term. However, he cautioned that it is still too early to determine how lasting or severe the impact will be. When asked whether the Fed expects the current oil shock to be temporary, Powell said no one can be certain. He noted the economic effects could turn out to be much smaller or significantly larger than anticipated, underscoring the high level of uncertainty facing policymakers. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A new U.S. intelligence assessment says North Korea has strengthened its military capabilities through support provided to Russia in the war against Ukraine. The findings come from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence Annual Threat Assessment of the U.S. Intelligence Community released on Wednesday. The report says North Korean forces have gained valuable modern combat experience and equipment, though the long-term impact will depend on how effectively Pyongyang institutionalizes those lessons. Despite the gains, the assessment notes the North is still likely to remain deterred by the United States and its allies. It also warns that Pyongyang continues to expand its strategic weapons programs, including missiles and nuclear warheads, and highlights its increasingly sophisticated cyber operations as a growing security threat. Meanwhile, North Korea and China are ramping up economic cooperation, with bilateral trade in the first 2 months of this year reaching its highest level in 9 years. According to customs data from China, trade between the two sides in January and February rose nearly 20% on year to about 2.9 billion yuan, or roughly $421 million US. China's exports to North Korea climbed more than 16%, while imports from the north jumped over 34%. The increase comes as the two sides resume cross-border transport links, including an international passenger train service between Pyongyang and Beijing for the first time in 6 years. Air China is also set to restart its Pyongyang-Beijing route later this month. President Lee Jae-myung has called for the need to speed up reforming the nation's capital market amid the crisis in the Middle East, vowing to overcome the so-called Korea discount. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
On the fluctuating local stock markets due to the war in the Middle East, the president said this.
작년에 2,500선에서 정말로 쉬지 않고 조정다운 조정 없이 6,000 중반대까지 올라갔는데 사실 매우 불안한 느낌을 가지고 있었지만 어쩌면 뭐 하나의 계기로 좀 이렇게 다지는 그런 과정을 겪고 있는 것 같기도 합니다.
He was speaking at a dialogue session with investors, firms, and financial authorities on Wednesday, saying that beyond overcoming the external challenge, the country should take the lead in carrying out reforms. Noting the so-called Korea discount, President Lee Jae-myung once again promised to close the valuation gap between local equities and global peers by addressing corporate governance issues.
저는 우리가 하기에 따라서 이 코리아 디스카운트가 아니고 얼마든지 정상평가를 넘어서서 코리아 프리미엄도 가능하다.
President Lee focused not only on cracking down on stock manipulation and enhancing the predictability of economic policies, but also on geopolitical risks.
한반도의 분단 상황 때문에 생겨나는 그리고 이게 정치적으로 악용되면서 지정학적 리스크가 또 문제였죠. 좀 잘 될라 그러면 뭐 휴전선에서 말폭탄이 오가다가 심지어 총격이 발생해서 저 나라 또 전쟁 나는 거 아닐까?
The financial authorities plan to introduce the naming and shaming of undervalued stocks and reorganize the Kosdaq market by separating more mature firms from less mature ones. Curbing double listings was also a focal point.
For a sustainable Korea premium, governance issues should be resolved, such as improving shareholder return and a ban on double listings.
President Lee noted that normalizing the capital market is crucial for the nation's economy and development, hoping that it could also help alleviate real estate speculation. South Korea has made a series of revisions to the Commercial Act, including an amendment mandating companies to cancel treasury stock to improve shareholder value. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The wait is over for BTS fans worldwide. As the global pop icons gear up for a historic free comeback concert in Seoul this weekend, experts forecast a massive economic ripple effect, the BTS-Nomics rivaling the financial impact of Taylor Swift's recent world tour. Our Chung Hee-rim explains more.
This Saturday, March 21st, Seoul's historic Gwanghwamun Square will turn into a sea of purple as BTS holds a massive free concert celebrating their fifth album, Arirang, drawing hundreds of thousands of fans. The economic anticipation is just as staggering as the expected crowd size. According to a report by IBK Investment and Securities, direct revenue from this comeback alone is projected to reach 2.9 trillion Korean won, or almost $2 billion. This conservative estimate factors in 6 million album sales, 6 million tour attendees, and massive merchandise revenue. The local tourism and retail sectors are already feeling this BTS effect. According to the travel platform 여기어때, hotel bookings in the downtown Jongno-gu and Junggu districts for this weekend have skyrocketed by 450% compared to the same period last year. Hotels in the downtown area are nearly fully booked, and international fans are expected to spend immensely during their stay before and after the concert.
If we estimate that about 100,000 of the 200,000 expected attendees are foreign tourists, and the average foreign tourist spends about 2.5 million won, this single event alone could generate a direct economic impact of 250 billion won.
For many fans, the trip goes beyond the concert itself. From K-pop merchandise stores in Myeongdong to local restaurants and cultural hotspots, visitors are actively seeking experiences tied to Korean culture.
Visitors don't just stay around Gwanghwamun. Foreign tourists are increasingly seeking out trendy alleys like Seongsudong. We expect this massive influx to revitalize smaller, local commercial districts across the entire city of Seoul.
The economic impact may extend well beyond a single event, fueling activity across the city's broader tourism ecosystem. Some analysts are already comparing the phenomenon to Swift-Nomics, driven by Taylor Swift, but say BTS could generate an even wider global footprint. This world tour could reach a staggering 40 trillion won, or $269 million in revenue. Industry insiders also say that a performance in this symbolic space could transform the area into a long-term destination for K-pop fans, similar to the Beatles' Abbey Road in London. As the capital prepares for the historic kickoff, all eyes are locked on Gwanghwamun. 정혜림, Arirang News.
So with more than 200,000 people expected to gather at Gwanghwamun Square for a BTS comeback concert this Saturday, preparations are in full swing. Telecom companies in particular are working to ensure seamless connectivity for the massive crowd. Our Park Junan has more.
Cell site technicians are deploying a temporary mobile cell site. The vehicle, designed to enhance internet connectivity and support spikes in network traffic, is being set up in preparation for BTS comeback concert on Saturday. Unlike other large gatherings with relatively low or non-essential internet use, this concert is expected to generate exceptionally high data use in a concentrated area. In particular, data traffic is likely to surge in and around the stage due to a spike in photo and video uploads, while data use may also rise outside as people watch live streams.
We saw reports that many foreign tourists would be attending, so we also analyzed roaming usage rates. We've modeled scenarios for up to 260,000 visitors and then designed the network accordingly, so we're confident people will be able to use telecom services without disruption.
On top of that, the three major mobile carriers said they will actively implement AI systems when providing network services to better distribute traffic. An expert said Korea's telecommunications service is already world-class, capable of handling concentrated traffic.
I think Korea's telecommunications technology, especially on the operational side, is among the best in the world. So the amount of bandwidth available per person is already quite high. And in terms of handling dense traffic, I believe we are far more capable than many other countries.
While BTS takes the spotlight, these unsung heroes keep the connection seamless so fans can fully enjoy the moment. The concert at Gwanghwamun Square is also a real-world testbed for Korea's telecom capabilities. Don't worry, BTS fans. Whether you're among the 22,000 concertgoers or watching from outside the venue, telecom companies have your fast on-site internet connection covered. Park Junan, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. The top U.S. intelligence official says that Iran's government remains intact but significantly weakened. During a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing in Washington on Wednesday, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard stated that U.S. strikes last year obliterated Iran's nuclear program with no signs of reconstruction. However, Gabbard repeatedly declined to disclose whether the intelligence community warned President Trump about the possible fallout of the current war, including the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The testimony follows the resignation of counterterrorism chief Joe Kent, who argued that Iran posed no imminent threat. Gabbard said that defining an imminent threat remains the president's sole responsibility. U.S. civil rights activist Dolores Huerta on Wednesday accused her United Farm Workers of America co-founder Cesar Chavez of sexually abusing her and others decades ago. The 95-year-old activist said in a formal statement that she had remained silent for 60 years to protect the farm worker movement, but could no longer hide the truth. The allegations, which include claims of forced encounters and secret pregnancies, coincided with a New York Times investigation into Chavez's treatment of young women. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has moved to abolish the state's Cesar Chavez Day holiday, while Arizona and New Mexico leaders called for the removal of his name from public landmarks. Chavez died in 1993. The Senegalese government is calling for an independent international investigation into suspected corruption within African football's governing body. The demand follows a ruling by the Confederation of African Football, or CAF, on Tuesday, which stripped Senegal of its 2025 Africa Cup of Nations title and awarded it to Morocco. Although Senegal won the January final 1-0 on the pitch, CAF overturned the result, ruling it a forfeiture because Senegalese players staged a 17-minute walk-off to protest a stoppage time penalty. The Senegalese Football Federation on Wednesday filed an appeal with the Court of Arbitration for Sport, labeling the decision a, quote, grossly illegal breach of trust. U.S. President Donald Trump has sparked international debate after suggesting statehood for Venezuela following their World Baseball Classic semifinal victory. After Venezuela defeated Italy 4-2 in Miami on Monday to advance to the final against Team USA, Trump posted on Truth Social questioning if, quote, statehood number 51 was the, quote, magic behind the country's recent changes. The comment follows dramatic shifts in U.S. relations with Venezuela, which included a military operation that captured Nicolas Maduro and the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
We are in for another day of big temperature swings, especially across inland areas. It was a colder start compared to yesterday, but temperatures will climb quickly this afternoon, rising by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in many places. And it gets even milder from here. It's going to be slightly breezier than normal today, but starting tomorrow, highs will be running above seasonal averages. And this afternoon, daily highs will be 1 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than yesterday. Seoul getting up to 11 degrees. Daegu will be much warmer at 16 degrees under sunny skies nationwide. Also good news on the air quality front. Air quality has returned to normal. Then we are expecting mostly clear skies to stick around for the time being, and we should notice morning temperatures gradually rising as well. Just keep in mind those big day to night temperature gaps will stick around, so it's worth dressing in layers.
That's all we have for today's noon edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Stay tuned.
To set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
한반도에서 가장 먼저 아침이 시작되는 곳. 대한민국 최동단에 위치한 섬. 천연기념물 제336호로 지정된 자연유산. 이곳은 경상북도 울릉군 울릉읍 독도입니다.